Recorded live from the mats of Radical MMA in New York City. Martial Culture Podcast. Your source for in-depth combat sports and martial arts insights with Coach Renee Dreyfus and Matt Peters. Ring the bell and let's get it on.
So we got some questions.
Yeah.
And where are these questions from?
Just people who wrote in, and also just people asked me at the academy. So,
I like this one.
Yeah. One of them was, does size really matter in jiu-jitsu or in MMA?
Don't give it away.
Oh, okay. Well, so go ahead.
It's a secret.
That's okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Do I get to pick my favorite?
You get to pick. Yes, you get to absolutely pick. You get to pick.
We'll have two, and we'll do that one you mentioned. But we're going to do this one. I like.
No, because actually, question time. The podcast we had the question and answer. Like a lot of my students came up to me and said, "Hey, I have this question. I'm like, you got to ask it on the podcast. I'll answer on the podcast." So it's like a way for me to force them to listen.
Yeah. Is Jackie Chan actually a good martial artist, or is his moves just flashy for movies?
Okay, yeah, and remember we talked about this in a podcast a long time ago where it talked about like cinema fighting versus real fighting.
Yeah.
And I really respect Jackie Chan as a performer. So, for example, I respect who else is a performer? Evel Knievel, I don't know, some stunt person. A stunt person does stuff, and Jackie Chan is trained in Beijing opera, which is, the origin of Beijing opera is martial art inspired entertainment. So it's kind of like the Chinese version of professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. So it's completely choreographed. There's a winner in this, and it tells a story through this, but it's completely choreographed using inspiration of fighting moves as a way to form entertainment, exactly like our Western pro wrestling, which uses wrestling techniques as a means of telling a story and being entertaining. I don't find pro wrestling entertaining, but that's neither here nor there. But Beijing opera is does that, and they tell these stories of ancient heroes of martial arts, and that's his training. And Jackie Chan is a wonderful, wonderful person. Obviously, he's done some good things in the world for charity, as I've heard, and all that. He is not a fighter. And he never claims to be. He does not claim to be a fighter. He is a martial artist in the sense of martial art being larger than just fighting, because there's a lot of people out there who do martial arts that are not fighters. They're performers, or they're using martial arts as a spiritual vehicle or fitness vehicle, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it is not martial arts in the capital martial. It is martial arts in the capital art. So he is a martial artist. Is he a legitimately skilled fighter? No. He's not. And nor does he claim to be. He does not. He's never, ever claimed to be a fighter. He never does. And he's just an entertainer, and that's what he likes to do. So, more power to him. And I'm a big fan. I don't watch his movies too much, but, when I do, I find them pretty entertaining.
Yeah, it was kind of like my gateway drug to martial arts.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Rush Hour was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And
Legend of the Drunken Master is like one of
Legend
my
of the Drunken. I remember that one. Yeah, that was funny. That was a funny movie.
Yeah,
it was hilarious. And it's a great, entertaining
Super Cop.
I've never seen that. Everybody tells me to see that, but that's so old.
That's
one.
Like
that's
one of his
90s,
first
right?
ones.
Yeah, from early in the 90s, right?
It was done in China, and then they brought it over to the United States and redubbed it.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember somebody telling me to see Super Cop, and it must have been like 91 or 90.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So much action. I think that somebody even actually, when they originally brought it over, they redubbed his lines. So they didn't have him do the English version.
Oh.
And then they fixed it later when he became actually a popular in the United States.
He did a movie recently where it was more serious. And because, usually he's very, very, and I didn't see it, but it was like his daughter gets kidnapped or something like that. It's like
Taken?
Like Taken, like a Kung Fu inspired Taken or something.
Did you see the one where he, like, the Legend of the Monkey King or something like that? He played like a Monkey King from some legend, and
which the Monkey King legend is a very famous Chinese legend. Yeah. And he comes down from heaven and has these pals, and they go around and it's called Journey to the West, and they go and try to get the Buddhist scrolls and bring them over to China. It's an ancient Chinese story that is like
Jet Li was in it too, I think.
Oh, really? Right. This has many, many, many iterations. This story is told over and over. There's a cartoon. There's a TV show from Taiwan, I think.
Dragon Ball has some.
It's inspired by. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I've never seen it, but I'm sure he'd make a great monkey.
I think that they screwed up because they made the main character like a teenager, and that the Monkey King and all that side was like a side story.
Oh.
So it's like they're trying to like Twilight it up and make it tweeny.
Oh.
I don't think it did very well in the box office.
No, it doesn't sound like they try to I think a lot of movies right now, it's sort of like they're trying to hit both markets, the Western market and the Asian market. So
China's market is huge.
Yeah, right. So they like, and the Avengers did this too. They're like, oh, we have to have a scene in Asia. Was the Avenger? I forget which one. No, it was Black Panther. They had to have a scene in Korea because, like, you know, they want to get the Asian market. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes, you know, it leads to taking weird plot.
There's
licenses.
so many rules too with censorship over there too. So they will sometimes edit the movie for differently.
Oh,
for
really?
different audiences because there's certain things that you can't
like
show
Tibet or something like that. Yeah, no.
Certain audiences.
Well, that's it is another totally different subject, right?
But before we go down that rabbit hole,
so entertainment martial artists and real martial artists are generally, you know, different. But there are some people who legitimately
like Steven Seagal.
He's
like legitimately
actually, you know, Dolph Lundgren. Most people don't realize Dolph Lundgren is a karate champion. Now, I mean, I'm saying he's like the toughest guy in the world or anything like that, but the guy legitimately is a Kyokushin karate champion. You know, so there you go. And Randy Couture now is a big star in the Expendables and stuff like that. So he's a fighter and actor. So every now and again, there's a crossover.
Yeah. How does size factor into BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Yeah. Okay. So this goes into what we were saying in fighting. I don't want to just talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I want to talk about all martial arts. But the one thing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is I think it is one of the arts that is best at dealing, particularly in a self-defense context, but the best at dealing with someone who is much, much, much heavier. It is kind of designed for that because when Helio Gracie was fighting in Vale Tudo or, you know, submission only matches, because not all his fights were Vale Tudo. They were like, you know, no time limit submission. Sometimes we're Vale Tudo. Vale Tudo meaning MMA with headbutts and stuff like that. And then submission only meaning there's no punches. Just you try to tap me out, I try to tap you out, right? And but he had opponents who massively outweighed him. Sometimes not. But so they had to have an idea of the whole idea was to chase efficiency and to find strategies to deal with a larger, stronger person. If anybody says size doesn't matter, though, that is bullshit. Size matters. But it doesn't matter, meaning, oh, because you're bigger, stronger, you automatically win. That's not how it works, particularly in jiu-jitsu, but in all martial arts, right? What size matters is particularly, let's start with Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It matters in if you mess up your technique, the consequences of that mess up are much worse. So if I do something wrong, I'm going to pay for that mistake 10 times more than if the person was lighter. So if I do everything right, generally speaking, I can make things happen if things go right. But the consequence of my error is tremendous. So for example, if I allow a really, really, really big guy to completely set his weight on me, that's going to be bad because now I'm gravity, weight, of course, that's going to be bad. Now, what I need to do is not, and it doesn't matter what weight, I don't want anybody to set their weight. I mean, and, you know, he just won his fight, but I haven't sparred him recently because I'm injured. But there was one time where I was sparring him. This is about a couple years ago, right? And G is much bigger than me, right? So, you know, and he sparred me, and I was kind of like sparring him the way I usually did, where I kind of let him do stuff because he wasn't as technically as good as I was for a certain amount of time where I could kind of like do much better. So I just let him set. I'd let him set and then I'd fight back and let him set. But I had a technical advantage. So I would fight out of these bad positions. I had such much more knowledge that I could get out of these positions. But he got better, a lot better. But I'm still fighting him the same way where I let him set a little bit, even a little, and I get beaten. Because he's so much bigger and now he's good. So I couldn't make a mistake. And then I fought him one night and I really did not do well. The next day I fought him again and I said, okay, this is not good. And literally the night before he probably, you know, out of an hour roll, 85 minutes was him doing much better than me, like really, really crushing me. And the very next day, I'm like, okay, I can't fight like that. I have to fight like I'm really going to fight. And I did not let him set and I did much better. You know, I did much better by never letting him set, never letting him get to a position where he felt comfortable. And I really made sure I didn't make any mistakes. And I was much more successful. I mean, it was still a great role and he did really well, but I was much more successful when I was very, very proactive and very, very detail and technique oriented. So obviously, all things being equal, you know, size can give you an advantage, but it doesn't, like we said, all things are never equal. What we have to do is the consequence of making a mistake in grappling is huge. So we can't make a mistake. If you demand a much higher level of technical skill. That being said, I always think like this. How would I fight if a guy stabbed me and I was bleeding out? Well, I better be perfect. So that's kind of always how I think. I need to be perfect. I can't coast people. And so that's a really good time to train with people who are much bigger and much larger. You cannot let them set. You cannot let them use gravity against you, because let me tell you, gravity is efficient. I know he doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just the force that comes down on us. So size can matter a lot if you're not on point with your technique and your grips. And let me tell you, there's gi jiu-jitsu and no gi jiu-jitsu. And no gi jiu-jitsu, there's so many more grips to dominate the guy. Unfortunately, a lot of those are not translatable to MMA, either gi or no gi, because they leave you open to punches. So what I do see is a lot of jiu-jitsu guys making mistakes when they transition to no gi, because they don't understand how to offset the other person's weight, And the key is making specific frames where the weight is not on you, but it's on a structure that allows the weight to go into the floor. Getting on your side, using the structure of your skeleton to offset the person's weight and not let it set on you, and keeping frames. So that's it. But now,
is there any problem? If there any reason you wouldn't want to train with somebody that's larger than you, if you're fighting at 125?
Yeah.
Would you?
That is a great question. That is a really great question. And I would say yes. There's number one. A 125er generally moves very different from a 185er. That being said, if you're not training for a specific fight, there's always something you can do with the larger opponent. You should do it as long as they're responsible, because obviously, if something bad happens, because they can happen. If the guy's 200, like I had one student and he's 127 pounds and he was fighting a person who was about 260, and he was beating him like all over the place. But then the 260 guy was not irresponsible. He was a really nice guy, really great person, but he was 265 pounds actually. And he slipped. And my student, who's the smaller student, who's more experienced, but he moved his arm in a place where he was vulnerable. As the larger person slipped, his elbow fell and he elbowed my student in the eye and actually cracked his orbital bone. So yes, the smaller guy should have been protecting himself, but accidents can happen, and the consequence of an accident is very high. So when I'm getting a fighter ready to fight, I generally like to stay in their weight class if we're free sparring, or if we're doing situational training, I'll make it so that you'll get the best work from that person without having to worry about the danger of the situation. So I'm like, okay, let's not do this. And we're just going to work this move right here. Okay. And I'll usually have the bottom person be the heavier person, but lighter weight class people move differently. They move differently. Generally speaking, they're not quite as tall. Yeah. And of course, they're not as heavy, and they tend to be faster, and they tend to be more technical. Yeah. So it depends, the basic rule of thumb for anyone is train, if you're competing, simulate the environment of your competition as closely as possible. If you're getting ready for some kind of competition, simulate your environment as closely prepare yourself for that environment as much as you can. The same for the street too, which is why in self-defense training, I always mix it up. I'm always having big and small, people fighting way outside their weight class, because there's no weight classes in real life. You have to have that understanding of how to fight someone much bigger, and fighting someone your size and fighting someone bigger, the taller especially, you have to adjust your leverages, and it takes experience. So it's very important to fight people of very different sizes than you, much smaller, same size, much bigger, maybe stocky, maybe skinny, and it just becomes a great experience. It makes you understand how to adjust each leverage appropriately for each individual opponent. That being said, like I said, the consequence of making a mistake against a bigger opponent is going to be bigger, and if the opponent is slips or has an accident, the chance you could get hurt is there because of the weight. So when I do put massive weight class differences, I always make sure that it's two really skilled guys or two really careful guys, just to be cautious. Now, when it comes to striking, it's not the same as jiu-jitsu. And one question down there is there physics to back this up? Absolutely. Force equals mass times acceleration. Force, the force of a punch, has to do with the mass of your body. There's no way DJ can punch as hard as Daniel Cormier. This is not possible. This is not possible. Demetrius Johnson is too small. It's like twice this guy's size almost, you know? You're talking about a 125er. Maybe he walks around at 140. And then you're talking Daniel Cormier's fighting at what does he fight, 235, something like that? 225? Yeah. You're 100 pounds. Like, you just punch more powerfully when you are bigger, period. Mm-hmm. And so, again, the consequences are really serious if you mess up. So how do you fight a guy who's bigger? If I were Holloway, and this is what I was thinking, if I were Holloway, what would I do to Poirier? Well, you got to move. You got to not be there. You cannot let him touch you. You got to be a ghost. And my personal philosophy, not always is, but it's very important, is to get into tight clinch range like Khabib does. And this is why Khabib never really had to worry about Conor McGregor once he clinched, because he's so tight. Conor McGregor can't get acceleration. Mm-hmm. So it's not just mass. Mass is important, but it's mass time, force equals mass times acceleration. When you take the acceleration out, then the force is less. Mm-hmm. And that's why the ground is so good for jiu-jitsu, because you can't accelerate off the ground in a lot of places the way you normally could when you accelerate punching off the floor. People don't know how to do that. So if I'm lying on my back and you're sitting on top of my chest, I cannot accelerate my punch. So if you try to punch me when I'm sitting on your belly and your back is on the floor, I'm mounting you, you will not get much power because there's no acceleration. You have the same mass, but there's absolutely no acceleration. The same thing in standing. When you push someone tight up against the wall and you gut wrench them tight and they can't move, they can't generate acceleration. Well, of course, they're not going to hurt you as much. And that's, Khabib all day when he's not playing around and want to outstrike people, which, he did a little bit too. He was like, oh, I'll see what you got, Connor. And let's trade some bombs here.
Interesting.
The key to dealing with people who are bigger is take away their acceleration. And that's the whole concept of jiu-jitsu there, but it's not just jiu-jitsu. Put them in corners where they can't move. Put them in clinch positions where they can't turn their hips. They can't accelerate. That's how you're going to deal with someone much bigger. So if I were Holloway, I would have really tried to make sure I wasn't on the end of that whip of the punch. The acceleration, the end of that acceleration is where you're eating the most power. So, that's how you deal with size in martial arts. If you're allowing acceleration of a larger fighter, you're gonna get hurt.
It's gonna be a bad time.
It's gonna be a bad time.
Move out of the way.
Yeah, move out.
Don't get hit.
Don't get hit.
Yeah.
Great coaching. Don't get hit. Don't lose.
You only lose when you lose.
You only lose when you lose.
Thanks, Conor McGregor, for leaving us with that. No. We have a whole bunch more questions, but we are running out of time, so we'll have to get to them later.
But it was fun. I think it was some good questions.
Yeah, great questions. Keep them coming.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter at Marshall_Culture and on Instagram at MarshallCultureCast. Please leave a review on iTunes, and we'll see you next time on the Marshall Culture Podcast.